Ladies and gentlemen, there is a moment in every painful relationship that no one warns you about. It's not when the arguments happen. It's not when the silence cuts deep. It's the moment you realize the person who hurt you fears something far more than losing you. They fear losing power over you. Tonight, we are not here to vilify or diagnose. We are here to uncover the truth that sets people free. If you've ever loved someone who made you question your worth, your reality, or your strength, stay with me, because what you're about to hear may explain everything you felt but could never name, and it may change the way you see your own power forever. A narcissist's greatest fear is not being left behind, and it's not loneliness in the way most people understand it. What they fear most is the loss of control. Control is the air they breathe. It is how they feel safe, significant, and powerful in the world. Without it, they feel exposed, unstable, and deeply threatened. For a narcissist, relationships are not built on mutual connection or emotional intimacy. They are built on influence, on knowing they can shape your reactions, steer your emotions, and predict your behavior. As long as they can pull you back in with guilt, charm, silence, or chaos, they feel secure. Even conflict feels comforting to them, because it confirms that they still matter, that they still have access to your emotional energy. That's why abandonment alone is not their true fear. You can leave physically and still be controlled emotionally. You can move on in appearance while still explaining yourself, replaying conversations, or hoping they will finally understand you. As long as you are emotionally engaged, they have not lost control. The real fear appears when control slips through their fingers. When you stop reacting the way you used to, when their words no longer provoke panic or urgency, when their silence no longer sends you into self-doubt. That moment feels catastrophic to them because it means they are no longer steering your inner world. Loss of control forces a narcissist to confront something they spend their entire life avoiding, their powerlessness. Without control, they are no longer superior, admired, or dominant. They are simply human, flawed, and ordinary. And that is the one reality they cannot tolerate. So when you choose emotional independence, when you stop chasing clarity from someone who thrives on confusion, you trigger their deepest fear. Not that you'll disappear, but that they no longer matter in the way they once did. And when that control begins to slip, something else happens beneath the surface, something far more unsettling for them. Hurting someone they care about threatens the very image they work so hard to protect. A narcissist does not see themselves as harmful. They see themselves as justified, misunderstood, even exceptional. Their sense of identity is carefully constructed around being right, being admired, being above reproach. So when their actions cause real pain, it creates a fracture in that illusion. Your hurt becomes evidence that contradicts the story they tell themselves about who they are. And that is dangerous territory for them. Not because they feel genuine remorse, but because your pain challenges their self-concept. They need to believe they are good, or at least blameless. When you are visibly wounded, emotionally distant, or no longer willing to absorb their behavior, it forces them to confront a version of themselves they cannot tolerate, the one capable of causing harm. The one who is not as superior, not as righteous, not as untouchable as they imagined. This is why they often rewrite the narrative after hurting you. Suddenly, you're too sensitive. Suddenly, the problem was your reaction, not their behavior. This isn't confusion, it's self-preservation. They are desperately trying to seal the crack in their self-image before it spreads. Your pain becomes a mirror, and they hate mirrors that don't flatter them. What terrifies them most in this moment is not that they hurt you, but that you might recognize what that hurt reveals, that you might see the pattern, that you might connect the dots and realize this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a dynamic. And once you see it clearly, they can no longer control the story of who they are in your eyes. That loss of narrative control feels just as threatening as losing emotional control itself, because now they are not just losing power over you, they are losing the version of themselves they depended on to survive. And when that carefully protected image begins to fracture, another layer of fear surfaces, one they rarely acknowledge, even to themselves. Guilt. Not as most people experience it, as a signal to repair, to reflect, to take responsibility. For a narcissist, guilt feels like danger. It feels like exposure. It feels like standing under a harsh light with nowhere left to hide. Because real guilt would require them to admit fault without excuses. It would require them to sit with the reality that they caused harm and that the harm mattered. And that kind of honesty threatens the very foundation of how they survive in the world. So instead of feeling remorse, they experience guilt as an attack on their identity. When you pull back after being hurt, when your energy shifts, they don't think, I hurt someone I love. They think, I am being seen. And that is terrifying. Guilt becomes something to escape, something to bury, something to project onto you. Suddenly, you're the cruel one. You're the unreasonable one. You're the one who won't let things go. This is why apologies, when they come, often feel hollow or conditional. They are not meant to heal you. They are meant to silence the threat, to restore balance, to make the discomfort go away. Guilt is not processed. It is managed. And the more grounded you become in your truth, the more threatening that guilt feels to them, because your clarity removes their ability to distort reality. Your calm presence says, without words, I know what happened, and I'm not pretending anymore. That is when guilt turns into aggression, withdrawal, or cold detachment, not because they don't care, but because caring would force them to confront themselves. So they choose defense over depth, control over conscience, and in doing so, they reveal the truth. Guilt isn't painful because they hurt you. It's painful because it risks revealing who they really are. And when guilt can no longer be buried or projected away, a deeper fear rises to the surface. The fear of being truly seen, not admired, not desired, not feared, but seen in the raw and unfiltered sense without the mask they've spent a lifetime perfecting. A narcissist survives through performance, through image, through a carefully curated version of themselves that earns approval and shields them from scrutiny. But when you've been close enough to be hurt by them, you've also been close enough to notice the cracks. You've seen the inconsistencies, the emotional gaps, the moments where the charm fades and something colder takes its place. What terrifies them is the possibility that you now see the full picture, not the grand gestures or the confident words, but the insecurity underneath, the fragile ego, the need for control disguised as strength. Being seen like that feels like exposure, like standing emotionally naked in front of someone who finally understands the truth. This is why, when you begin to detach, they often try to pull you back with intensity. Sudden vulnerability, emotional confessions, promises of change, not because they've embraced self-awareness, but because they are trying to regain control of how you see them. They want to replace your clarity with confusion, your insight with hope, because once someone truly sees them, they lose the ability to manipulate perception, and perception is everything to them. It's how they maintain power, how they avoid accountability, how they convince themselves they are still untouchable. Your awareness threatens more than the relationship. It threatens the illusion they live inside. And that's why your quiet understanding becomes so destabilizing. You don't need to confront them or expose them publicly. The simple fact that you see clearly that you no longer buy into the performance is enough to make them feel exposed. To be seen without admiration is their deepest vulnerability, and once that happens, they know they can never fully control the narrative again. And once they sense that the narrative is slipping out of their control, that you see more than they intended you to see, the next fear takes hold with full force: accountability. For most people, accountability is uncomfortable, but it's survivable. It's a step toward growth. For a narcissist, accountability feels like annihilation, because accountability means there is no one else to blame. No story to twist, no version of events where they remain the hero or the victim. It means standing still in the truth without defenses and admitting that their actions caused harm. And that kind of reckoning threatens their entire sense of self. They have their identity around being above fault, being exceptional, being justified. So when you calmly hold your ground, when you no longer accept excuses or emotional detours, you become a living reminder of what they are trying to avoid. You are not attacking them, yet they feel attacked. Not because of your words, but because your clarity leaves no room to escape. This is why accountability often triggers extreme reactions: rage, cold withdrawal, sudden detachment, or a dramatic reversal where they portray themselves as the wounded one. These are not random behaviors. They are emergency responses to a perceived existential threat. To a narcissist, being held accountable feels like erasure. If they admit fault, they fear they will collapse into shame, lose superiority, and be exposed as ordinary, flawed human, and that identity feels unbearable to them. So instead of repairing the damage, they try to destroy the process. They discredit your feelings, they minimize the harm, They accuse you of being unforgiving or obsessed with the past, anything to avoid the stillness where truth would have to be acknowledged. But here is the quiet power you hold. You don't need to force accountability. Your refusal to abandon your truth already delivers it. And that silent firmness is what makes accountability feel so terrifying to them. And when accountability can no longer be forced out of the conversation, when you stop asking for explanations and stop demanding recognition of the harm, something profound shifts. This is the moment that truly unsettles them, the moment you stop chasing, the moment you stop fixing, the moment you stop trying to pull clarity from someone who survives on confusion. To a narcissist, pursuit equals power. Your questions, your tears, your need to be understood all keep them in control of the emotional rhythm. As long as you are reaching, they are Leah. But when you withdraw that effort, when you grow still and self-contained, the dynamic collapses. They feel it immediately. Your silence is not empty to them. It is deafening. It removes the stage. It removes the feedback loop they rely on to feel significant. Without your reactions, they are left alone with their own discomfort, their own unresolved guilt, and their own fragile self-image. This is why your calm becomes more threatening than confrontation ever was. Anger still keeps them involved. Pleading still gives them importance. Silence, grounded silence, signals something they fear deeply: emotional independence. When you stop chasing, they can no longer predict you. And unpredictability feels like danger to someone who needs control to feel safe. They may escalate, provoke, or suddenly attempt reconnection, not because they've changed, but because they are trying to restore the old pattern where your attention kept them regulated. But the shift has already happened. Your energy has moved inward. You are no longer orienting your worth around their responses. This is the moment fear takes root in them because they realize they no longer live at the center of your emotional world. They are no longer the axis around which your thoughts turn. And in that quiet withdrawal, without confrontation or explanation, you reclaim something powerful, not just peace, but authorship over your own life. And that loss of access is something they feel more deeply than any argument you could ever make. And in that space you create by stepping back, something else begins to echo far louder than any words ever could. Silence. Not the kind that is empty or passive, but the kind that carries weight. The kind that speaks without speaking. For a narcissist, that silence is unbearable. They are used to noise, emotional reactions, explanations, defenses, conflict, even pain. Noise reassures them that they still exist in your inner world, that they still have a role. But when you go quiet in a grounded, self-contained way, the silence becomes a mirror they cannot look away from. Because silence does not argue with their version of reality. It doesn't challenge it directly. It simply refuses to participate. And that refusal strips their tactics of oxygen. Your silence says, I see what this is, and I'm not engaging anymore. And to them, that is louder than any accusation. It signals that you no longer need their validation, their understanding, or their permission to move forward. This is why silence often provokes frantic behavior. Sudden messages, emotional pullbacks, attempts to provoke a reaction, even hostility. They are trying to break the stillness because in that stillness, their power fades. Silence removes the battlefield, and without a battlefield, they don't know how to function. There is nothing to win, nothing to dominate, nothing to manipulate, just space. And space forces reflection. But reflection is exactly what they avoid. Your silence also does something else that terrifies them. It allows you to process your reality without interference, without distortion, without gaslighting. In that quiet, clarity grows, strength settles in, and they feel that shift even if they can't name it. They feel themselves losing relevance, losing access, losing influence. So understand this. When you choose silence, not as punishment, but as self-respect, you are not disappearing. You are becoming untouchable. And that is why your silence roars so loudly in their mind. And as that silence settles into your life, something even more destabilizing takes shape. You begin to stand on your own emotionally, not hardened, not closed, but independent. And for a narcissist, your emotional independence is one of the most frightening shifts. They can witness. They need to be needed. Not in a healthy, mutual way, but in a way that keeps them central to your emotional regulation. When your mood Your confidence, your sense of worth no longer rises and falls based on their behavior. They lose their anchor. They can no longer pull strings that aren't attached. Emotional independence means you feel your feelings without collapsing into them. You validate your own experience instead of waiting for theirs. You make decisions without seeking permission, approval, or reassurance from someone who once positioned themselves as the authority over your reality. To a narcissist, this feels like abandonment even when you're still present, because what they've lost isn't proximity, it's influence. They may still be in the room, but they are no longer in control of the emotional climate. This is why they often try to undermine your independence. Subtle criticism, doubt, minimizing your growth, questioning your confidence. They sense the shift and attempt to destabilize it because your stability exposes their dependency on control. Your independence reminds them that their power was never inherent. It was borrowed from your empathy, your patience, your willingness to bend. And once you stop handing that power over, they are left confronting their own emptiness. The most unsettling part for them is this: emotional independence cannot be argued with. It cannot be negotiated. It doesn't need permission. It simply exists. And as you grow more self-directed, more grounded in your own emotional truth, they feel themselves fading from the center of your world. And that slow, irreversible fading is something they fear far more than anger or confrontation ever could. And as that independence takes root, something quietly devastating happens for them. You begin to heal, not loudly, not to prove a point, but genuine. Your nervous system softens, your thoughts no longer orbit around what went wrong, your life starts expanding again. And to a narcissist, your healing is not inspiring, it is threatening, because your healing rewrites the story they relied on. For so long, their sense of importance was tied to your pain, your confusion, your longing. As long as you were struggling, they mattered. They were the center of the wound, the unanswered question, the unresolved chapter. Your suffering kept them relevant. But when you heal, you take that role away. Your laughter without them. Your peace without closure. Your strength without their validation sends a message they cannot tolerate. You did not need them to survive. You did not need them to become whole again. That realization cuts deep because it exposes a truth they tried desperately to avoid, that their power was situational, not essential, that their presence was not the source of your worth, only a chapter in your story. This is why they may react strangely to your growth, dismiss it, mock it, rewrite it as fake or temporary. They need to believe your healing isn't real, because if it is, it proves something unbearable. They were not as central to your life as they believed. Your healing also removes the fantasy that they were special in their ability to affect you. When you thrive without them, it shatters the illusion that they left a permanent mark. And that is terrifying for someone who measures value by impact. So understand this. Your healing is not just recovery. It is quiet liberation. It is proof that your life was never dependent on their approval or presence. And the more whole you become, the more they are forced to face the truth that you outgrew them, not through revenge, but through self-respect. And when your healing is no longer something they can dismiss, when your independence is steady and your peace is unmistakable, the deepest fear finally surfaces, the fear beneath all the others, the fear they have spent their entire life running from. Irrelevance. Not rejection, not abandonment, irrelevance. To be rejected still means they mattered enough to be pushed away. To be abandoned still carries emotional weight. But to be irrelevant means they no longer occupy space in your thoughts, your emotions, or your decisions. It means they have no role to play in your inner world anymore. For a narcissist, this is the ultimate loss. Their identity is built on being central, impactful, unforgettable. They need to be the one you remember, the one you measure against, the one who still stirs something inside you. When you no longer do that, when they are simply a memory without charge, their sense of self begins to unravel. Irrelevance means their influence has expired. Their ability to provoke, control, or define you has ended, and nothing frightens them more than becoming unnecessary. This is why they may attempt one final reach, a message, a reminder, a provocation, not to reconnect, but to confirm they still exist in your emotional landscape. Because if they don't, they are forced to confront a painful truth. They were not as powerful as they believed. They were temporary. And here is where your power becomes complete. You don't need to erase them from history. You don't need to prove anything. You simply continue living a full life, a peaceful life, a self-directed life. In doing so, you deliver the final realization they cannot escape, that your worth was never tied to them and your future does not require their presence. And in that quiet truth, you reclaim everything they once tried to control. And here is where everything comes together, not in anger, not in blame, but in clarity. Because this story was never really about the narcissist. It was always about you, about the moment you realized that your pain did not define you and your silence did not mean weakness. It meant growth. If you've listened this far, it's because something in you recognized the truth. You felt it in your body before you understood it in words. You've lived the confusion, the self-doubt, the emotional exhaustion of loving someone who needed control more than connection. And yet, you're still here, still listening, still learning. That alone says everything. What a narcissist fears most is not your anger or your distance. It's your awakening. The moment you stop organizing your life around their reactions, the moment you stop explaining your worth, the moment you choose peace over proving a point. And here is the quiet victory they never see coming. You don't need revenge. You don't need closure from someone who never offered honesty. You don't need to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you. Your life moving forward is the answer. Your calm is the boundary. Your growth is the closure. Your self-respect is the freedom. Oh, if you are standing at that threshold right now, unsure, healing, rebuilding, know this. You are not losing anything by letting go of what hurt you. You are gaining yourself back. Stay with this truth. Carry it with you. Let it guide your choices. Because the moment you choose yourself fully without apology is the moment the story truly ends. Not with their fear, but with your strength. And that is the ending they never controlled.